Hey everyone, glad you tuned in. I've been sitting on some of these stories for a while because I wanted to make sure they were worth your time. They are. Subscribe, and let's get started. I took a taxi in Prague, and the driver had a photo of my dead grandparents on his dashboard. He recognized me instantly without me saying anything. Sometimes the scariest moments come from people who recognize you when they shouldn't possibly know who you are. I'm 28, American, and this was my first solo trip to Europe. I landed at Václav Havel around 8 p.m. on a Thursday, grabbed my luggage, found a taxi, and climbed in. The driver was an older man, 70s maybe, quiet and polite. We barely talked, just gave him my hotel address and settled in. 20 minutes into the drive, something caught my eye. On the dashboard was a small plastic frame with a faded photograph. It looked old, early 1960s. The colors had shifted to strange tones from decades in the sun. I leaned forward. My hands went cold. I knew those faces. I'd seen them exactly twice in my life. Once at 8 when my grandmother showed me a box of family pictures, and once at their funerals when I was 12. Maria and Joseph, my grandparents, dead for more than a decade. I was still trying to process how their photo ended up in this taxi when the driver stopped at a red light. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror and said something in Czech. I didn't understand the words, but his tone was deliberate, careful. Then he switched to English, accented but clear, and said, "I have been waiting to see you for a very long time." He knew exactly who I was, and I had no idea who he was or how he could possibly know that. That moment changed everything about how she understood her own family. The taxi pushed deeper into Prague. The driver's tone shifted, became something more certain. He kept addressing me in that careful English, eyes locked on me in the mirror. "Your grandmother, Maria. I knew her face when I was young man. She was kind, very strong." I couldn't breathe right. My hands were locked against my legs. "How do you know my grandmother?" I managed to ask. "I know your family," he said, turning onto another narrow street. "I have waited many years to see someone from your bloodline come to Prague. I watched the airport very long time." The air in the taxi went thin. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't confused. He knew exactly who I was, and he was calmly telling me he had been watching terminals, waiting for my face. For how long? Years? Decades? I tried to remember any family story that would explain this and came up with nothing. Nothing. The taxi pulled in front of my hotel. He turned around, and his expression was almost grandfatherly, which somehow made it so much worse. "You are safe," he said, "but your family does not tell you everything. Some things must stay hidden." I paid him with shaking hands, didn't check my change, and got out like the car was on fire. Standing in the cold Prague night, legs still shaking, I finally let myself think it. Someone has been waiting for me. Someone has known I might come. And everything I believed about my family just crumbled. The violation of it. Being recognized without consent by a stranger who knew her bloodline, her family, her lineage. Somewhere in her family's past, something had triggered decades of watching. She was missing an entire chapter of her own history, and that chapter might be watching her right now too. The knowledge settled into her bones that night, cold and absolute. Nothing about her childhood meant what she thought it meant. There were secrets. There were people. There was her grandmother's face on a stranger's dashboard, and a stranger with kind eyes who had been waiting at an airport for her to arrive. In the hotel room, the adrenaline hit. I locked the door and couldn't stop shaking. A stranger had my grandmother's face on his dashboard. He looked at me like he'd been searching for me. He said he'd been waiting. I couldn't call my parents. I had no idea what to ask. Every family story I'd ever heard. Grandparents came from Europe, had my dad, died. No Prague connection. No reason anyone would keep their photo like a sacred relic. Hours passed, searching my memory for anything that would explain his certainty. I found nothing. By dawn, I hadn't slept. I knew my entire childhood was built on protective lies. Someone across the world had answers. He was waiting. The comments saw what she was beginning to understand. "This is genuinely one of the most disturbing posts I've read here. You need to understand that this wasn't coincidence or harmless nostalgia. This was a man who had your photograph waiting in his taxi for decades. He was positioned at that airport specifically to intercept you. That's premeditation. Please report this to police immediately. This is genuinely one of the most disturbing posts I've read here. You need to understand that this wasn't coincidence. This was a man who had your photograph waiting in his taxi for decades. Please report this to police immediately. I know I should have gone to the police immediately, but I was in shock in a way I can't fully explain. When he said, "I've been waiting to see you for a very long time," my entire body locked up. I physically couldn't move. I paid him, got out at the hotel, shaking so badly I could barely get the keycard to work. I called my dad that night and asked him directly, "Who is Gregor Novotny?" because I saw that name embroidered into the taxi seat cover. He said, "Where did you see that name?" Not, "What are you talking about?" He already knew. He was waiting for me to see it too. I booked a flight home before I slept that night. The most important detail here is your father's response. When you asked where you saw the photo, he didn't ask what photo. He asked where. That means he already knew someone had it. He's been waiting for this contact his entire adult life. Your parents didn't raise you in ignorance. They raised you in protected ignorance, fully aware that someday someone might find you. That level of fear only comes from running from something or someone very real. Her entire past had shifted. She booked a flight that night. No hesitation, no debate. Just booked it. The letters inside the package and what they revealed about my family. My parents picked me up at the airport. I told them about the driver. My mother went white. My father asked where I saw the photo. Not what, where. They knew. We went to the attic. Boxes dated 1961, 1962. Letters in Czech my father translated shaking. My grandparents fled Prague in 1962 for state security reasons, something he won't explain. Just fragments, people who wanted them found, people who never stopped looking. My grandfather's letter mentioned those who remember and the waiting. The driver was stationed there deliberately, waiting for me. My entire childhood was a lie. The thread zeroed in on that word, waiting. The most important detail here is your father's response. When you asked where you saw the photo, he didn't ask what photo, he asked where. That means he already knew someone had it. This detail confirms that OP's parents have lived their entire adult lives in active fear of this scenario. They didn't raise their daughter in blissful ignorance. They raised her protected and hidden, fully aware someone might eventually find her or make contact. The father's immediate pivot to where instead of what shows he has contingency plans for exactly this situation. He's thought about it. He's prepared for it. That level of preparation only happens when you're hiding from something very real and very dangerous. Everyone understood now. The driver knew who she was. Her parents were being watched. 3 weeks after getting home, she was still waiting for something. Then the envelope arrived. It came on a Tuesday morning, no return address, just my name in careful handwriting on a manila envelope. Inside were 3 letters in Czech, old ones with formal script, and underneath them a hand-drawn map marked with coordinates in red pen, a date, years old. I stood in my kitchen staring at it for a long time. Then I made a choice. I didn't read the letters. I didn't translate the coordinates or search online for the location. I got a drawer in my desk, the one that sticks, that nobody uses, and I sealed everything inside, the envelope, the letters, the map, all of it. I locked the drawer and I haven't opened it since. I don't want to know what happens next. I don't want to know who sent it or what those coordinates point to. Some doors, once you know they exist, you can't unknow them. I'm not ready to walk through this one. Maybe I never will be. The comments hit hard. I've had creepy travel encounters, but never anything like this. A stranger who carries your family's photo, knows who you are without you introducing yourself, and positions himself to intercept you at an airport is not normal, interesting coincidence territory. That's predatory planning. Whether he intends physical harm or not, he clearly intends to deliver a message. The fact that he let you leave is itself a message. I want to ask the hard question. After a long flight, in a foreign language environment, could you have misunderstood exactly what he said? Exhaustion can sharpen fear. That said, the package arriving 3 weeks later is not something you misunderstood. That's concrete. That's intentional contact happening now. That confirms the entire encounter was real and planned. Here's what stays with you. She was tracked across an ocean. Someone in Prague has been waiting for her all these decades. Her parents spent 40 years hiding a truth. Now it's unraveling. The past found her, and it's sending packages. What are those coordinates? Who sent it? What happens if she follows them? That's the violation. You've been seen the whole time. And on to the next one. I found my manager's surveillance binders with detailed notes on every employee's personal life and body. The information he had terrified me. There's a specific kind of terror that comes from discovering you've been watched, really watched. Not paranoia, but documented, systematic, every detail accounted for. And for one 24-year-old night shift warehouse worker, that discovery would come from something as mundane as retrieving a password. I worked the night shift at a logistics warehouse. My manager, Derek, kept his login credentials in his desk drawer, and one night, when a system went down, I needed to grab them to get back online. I opened the drawer and saw 3 large binders, each labeled with a name: Derek, Morgan, and mine. I stood there for 2 seconds telling myself not to open it. I opened it anyway. The first page was a photograph, taken from outside my apartment without consent. I was walking to my car and someone had been close enough to capture my face. Below that was everything: my full name, address, phone number, every social media account I had. Then the entries started. 14 months of them, dated, organized chronologically. My mood that day, what I wore, a personal call about my mom's appointment, something I never mentioned at work, but he had that written down. Conversations about relationship problems and family struggles that only close friends knew. Notes on my appearance and how it changed. When I look tired, how my voice shifts when anxiety takes over. Throughout the binder were color-coded tabs dividing sections. Emotional patterns, vulnerabilities. Others labeled things I was too terrified to read. Each entry methodical, analytical, calculated. This wasn't casual observation. This was systematic documentation of every weakness he'd identified in me. I'd been studied like a threat assessment for 14 months, and I had absolutely no idea it was happening. But the reading continued, and with each page, the horror deepened. The first page had that picture. The next page started the entries. January 14th says my mood seemed restless, unable to focus, wears dark colors, fidgeting during shift. February 3rd, ate lunch alone again, appears isolated, phone calls on break, conversation in low tones, seemed distressed. The dates kept going. The entries spanned 14 months. 14 months recorded like some clinical case study. Each annotation was dated. He documented when I started wearing a bracelet, described physical changes month by month, noted conversations I'd had with coworkers that he had no right knowing about. But the scariest part was how he wrote it. The handwriting was neat, methodical, clinical, not casual observations. Color-coded tabs marked sections, emotional patterns, behavioral shifts, vulnerabilities. That last tab made me feel sick. Vulnerabilities. He was mapping out where I was weak, where I could be hurt, where I could break. I understood then what this was. Derek had been systematically studying me for over a year, building a detailed profile. The photograph, the entries, the clinical language, and color-coded tabs. He was constructing a map of my vulnerabilities. This wasn't surveillance. This was predatory planning. This was someone building leverage. The scope of it became clear after that. If Derek had spent 14 months documenting these kinds of vulnerabilities, mapping weak points that deliberately, then the other binders in his desk weren't mysteries. They were files. They were dossiers. They were evidence of a pattern, and there were multiple targets. This couldn't be ignored. Not as office drama, not as bad management, not as anything other than what it was. A calculated threat that had been building for 14 months, and it had to be reported. I wasn't going to sit on this anymore. I reported it to HR the next morning. I remember sitting in Sarah's office, opening Derek's binder across her desk. Page after page. She read the entries, bathroom habits logged by date, detailed notes about my appearance and mood, conversation snippets I'd never told anyone. Her face drained of color. She told me this was beyond standard HR protocol. They called the owner and legal team. Within an hour, Derek was placed on leave. I was told not to return until the investigation concluded. The owner called that evening. They'd contacted the police. Derek's case escalated to criminal investigation. They'd found documentation he'd done this to other employees. Marcus had a binder. Sarah had a binder. 3 thick binders, each labeled with a name, each filled with methodical surveillance. I felt relief I wasn't alone, but sick knowing how many people he'd been watching. The Reddit response was immediate and horrified. This is absolutely insane. The fact that he documented your bathroom breaks and what you wore is genuine stalking. I'm so relieved you found the binder and reported it before he could escalate further. What about the other binders, though? Did Marcus, Sarah, and the rest have similar level of detail entries? Or was he uniquely focused on you? Because that changes whether this is a control thing or something else entirely. One commenter asked the question I'd been avoiding. This is such a specific detail. Did he ever act strange around you directly? Like, did he ever reference things he shouldn't have known? Or ask questions that made your radar go off? Not in the moment, but now I'm replaying things. He'd ask these casual questions. Like one time he asked if my car was running okay after I mentioned needing an inspection. And I realized he was verifying information he'd already collected from watching me. He'd ask Sarah questions about me in a way that seemed innocent. I think he was testing me, seeing what I'd volunteer versus what I'd hide. It wasn't creepy in the actual interaction, but knowing what I know now, I realized he was studying my reactions. That might actually be worse than if he'd been openly threatening. Weeks later, OP came back with an update that made everything worse. I finally got the police report, and what Derek documented about all of us changes everything. The investigation found a lot more than just those binders. Derek had digitized everything. Screenshots of my LinkedIn profile from multiple dates, a complete list of every social media account connected to me, dated entries of public sightings showing where I'd been and what I was doing. My home address was there, my car license plate, all of it cross-referenced and organized. The scope expanded from physical binders to digital files backed up somewhere. When I asked about the vulnerabilities section, the part that terrified me most, the detective said the specifics were sealed. No disclosure about what was in it. No answer about whether Derek's facing charges. No confirmation he no longer has access to any of the files. They confirmed the investigation happened, and they found evidence of systematic documentation of all of us, but then went silent. No closure. The comment section did what it always does when the mystery deepens. Did the police ever actually follow up with you? The fact that they won't give you closure about an investigation into your stalker is almost as disturbing as the initial discovery. You deserve to know if he's facing charges. This is legitimately one of the scariest workplace stories I've ever read. The premeditation, the organization, this man was building a detailed profile for something. I hope law enforcement is taking it seriously. The police silence is what's bothering me most. If someone had documented my schedule, my address, my physical appearance in detailed entries, I'd need to know if they're facing charges or if they're still out there with that information backed up somewhere. That lack of closure feels like a complete failure. The vulnerabilities tab is keeping me up at night. Please tell me you're working with a lawyer because he knew where you lived. He knew your schedule. He had 14 months to study you. This feels incomplete and terrifying. Derek got terminated. That's what HR told Warehouse Anon 24 in the follow-up. The police investigation closed with no public explanation of charges or intent. The criminal case outcome never reached the warehouse floor. And that was it. I finally got the police report, and what Derek documented about all of us changes everything. I finally got the police report after filing 3 separate requests. What they found was worse than I thought. Derek had digital copies of everything. Screenshots of our LinkedIn profiles, our locations from Google Maps, notes on our bathroom breaks and lunch habits, detailed observations of our breaking points. The vulnerabilities section had a ranking system. Law enforcement says they found enough to open a case, but they won't tell me what they're prosecuting him for. It falls under electronic surveillance laws, maybe? The sealed parts of the file cover the investigation of intent, whether he was planning to use the information. I still don't know. We all still don't know. Derek lost his job. That's the only closure we got. The comments hit different on this one. I worked night shift warehouse jobs for years and seen some weird managers, but this is beyond anything. The granular detail about your body, your stress levels, your routine, that's not management, that's obsession. I'm genuinely concerned for your safety now. Has anyone checked if Derek worked at other warehouses before? If this is a pattern across multiple employers, law enforcement might have critical context. This feels like something he'd repeat if not prosecuted. Warehouse Anon 24 quit 2 weeks later, removed location data from every social media account, changed their phone number, set all profiles to private. Derek's files got seized, but they still live with the permanent knowledge that a coworker spent 14 months mapping their vulnerabilities. The psychological damage outlasts the job. The spaces meant for safety became observation chambers. And the most terrifying part is not knowing what he was building toward. That's the last story for today.